Okay, good morning. Let's jump in. No problem. Okay, so let's, new time. We'll see if this works, but we also wanted to switch things up a little bit just for the summer months. For the summer months, we'll see. Okay, let's see what happens the whole summer. But the thought was to really just pick different topics and touch upon them. So, in the past we've done like Hilchah Shabbos and gone through that, but over here, instead of picking, a particular form of law, pick a topic instead and talk about it throughout all the different laws that pertain to it. So, for example, today we're going to talk about coffee, and we're going to talk about coffee as it relates to Shabbos, as it relates to Starbucks, as it relates to, brachos that we make on coffee, and all these different things. If you don't drink coffee, I apologize, but they'll be pertinent halachos that will be relevant. Yes.
So you're not going to be finishing up Hilchos Shabbos?
So I hope to continue with Hilchos Shabbos, but I'm going to take a little break for the summer, where we're going to focus on more topical. So I'm thinking like next week, like some like dental hygiene. As much as that sounds boring or not or whatever, but there's so many different halachos, or whether it comes to basic creams or things of that nature as a separate halacha. Meaning all these things have relevance not only in the realm of Shabbos, but they have relevance to so many different things. So instead of focusing on Shabbos or kashrus, focus on a topic and then all of its branches. So we'll try something new, a little different for the summer. Let's jump in. So coffee. So for those of us who are coffee addicts, this is quite relevant. And one of the things that comes up, one of the things that's worth noting just about the history of coffee, the topic of this series is contemporary issues. Coffee doesn't seem too contemporary, but the truth is it is. It's something which we only find really being discussed in Jewish literature in the 16th century. Starts in the 16th century. The earliest source is the Radvaz. He lives in Egypt, and it's something which is somewhat new in Egypt. In the 1500s, it's something somewhat new. People were not drinking coffee before that. It seems, at least the initial trade starts coming from Ethiopia, and people are drinking coffee, and there are questions that the Radvaz addresses, which we'll come back to a little bit later. But only later do we start seeing it being discussed in more Ashkenazi type circles, like Rav Yaakov Emden, almost 200 years later in the 18th century, is discussing it in the context of in England, and discussing different halachos as it relates to coffee drinking. Now, the interesting part of that is, and I mentioned this way back when, at some year before Shavuos, is that there are some historians who point out that the practice of staying up all night actually follows the coffee trade. That it's the Sephardim who are first staying up all night. In the 16th century, most famously, probably the most famous all-night story involves Rav Yosef Karo and the other and some other mystics who lived during his time, who stay up all night, and they have this wild revelation. You could find it online where this malach shows up and talks to them, and it's this very intense thing, and that's taking place in the Sephardic region where coffee already exists. And then later on, you only find people starting to stay up in the 18th century in more of the Ashkenazic places, and presumably because most of us would have a hard time staying up without coffee. Coffee changes the way that coffee and electricity change our relationship to day and night. Right? All of a sudden, you have lights on, which are cheap. All of a sudden you have stimulants which allow us to stay up. So little sidebar of some of the interesting history. One other interesting historic tidbit before we jump into the halachos is the Maxwell House Haggadah. The Maxwell House Haggadah is here, exists.
So many of them.
Okay, I'm not taking them from. Please do not drop them off at the shul. We do not want them. but where do they come?
Now
They're
vintage art.
But where does this come from? It comes from a very wise marketing campaign, because there was questions when people became a little bit more cognizant of different questions about kitnios. The question was, should coffee be included in kitnios? And the psak was coffee should not be included in kitnios, but there was a concern that this wouldn't catch on. So Maxwell House very wisely went ahead and said, we are going to make haggadahs. Now, if you see the words Maxwell House on a haggadah, then clearly coffee is something you could drink on Pesach, or else you would not be able to have Maxwell House haggadahs. And therefore, we can now, thank God, drink coffee on Pesach. And this was just a marketing ploy to ensure that people would know that they could drink coffee on Pesach. Okay. With all that in mind, let's now jump into a couple of different halachos in different realms of halacha. We're going to focus on Shabbos. We're going to focus on tefillah. We're going to focus on, again, buying coffee in public spaces, and then on brachos of coffee. So let's talk about making coffee on Shabbos. How is instant? Who here drinks instant coffee? Okay. If I'm really stuck, I don't like it. Okay, but anyway, fine. Bottom line is, there we go, fine, good. How is instant coffee made? Instant coffee is made by, they basically cook the coffee. They cook the coffee beans, and what comes out, they cook them over and over again, and what happens is a juice comes out of them. Yeah, that's what cooking it does, and liquid comes out of them, and that liquid is ultimately frozen. through a whole process, and they basically freeze dry. That's the freeze dried coffee that they have, but it initially goes through a cooking process. So, and if you think about it, at face value, there should be no problem. We have a concept called ein bishul achar bishul. Okay, ein bishul achar bishul, which means once you cook something once, there is no concern of cooking it a second time, and therefore, there should presumably be no issue about making coffee on Shabbos. The question though is as follows, and that is that when it comes to a liquid, we do have a concept, right? We know that if you have a liquid, you would not be allowed to warm up or heat up a liquid on Shabbos, right? That we do not do. And therefore the question is, how do we see these freeze-dried kernels, whatever you want to call them, the granules, thank you, that's what I'm looking for. How do you look at these freeze-dried granules? Are they a solid? Or since they once were a liquid, now they're like almost like it's like water that's frozen. It's ice. Is that water? Is that a solid? And therefore there is some question about how do you look at this? Is this a liquid? Is this a solid? And therefore halachically, most poskim say that ideally you should only make coffee in a kli sheni for this reason, because then already you've gone down. Meaning if you cook it in a kli rishon, there's probably you probably not do anything asur. There's certainly what to rely upon, but because of this concern that we do not treat this like a liquid, rather we treat it like a solid. Other way around, sorry. We don't treat it like a solid, we treat it like a liquid. The best way to make coffee is get water from your urn. Don't, some people would normally put some coffee granules in their cup and then take water out of the urn. You should do the opposite. Put water in your cup, and then you can put the granules in there. That's already a full-fledged kli sheni. No problem. Okay, virtually everyone would agree making coffee in that fashion would be fine on Shabbos. Yes.
Is this why you can make hot cocoa without it being like tea cents?
So when it comes to,
Because my husband says that you can make hot cocoa on Shabbos.
you're saying the powdered stuff, yeah. So I believe it would be a similar process where it's going to be some level of cooking as well that's taking place beforehand. Yes.
So years ago, like 50 years ago, I learned that the Rav said coffee, you don't need a kli sheni because coffee's a spice, not a. So I don't remember. I was wondering if you knew it.
I'm not sure. Again, this is a chumrah. I would tell you this whole liquid solid thing, meaning at the end of the day.
I'm just saying it was an
interesting
thing.
I'm not, because it's a spice. I'm not sure what that means. I'm not sure.
I should actually put the cocoa powder in the hot water instead of the hot water on the hot.
If you're putting it directly from the urn, yeah, you definitely shouldn't put the powder and the water into the powder. You shouldn't put directly from the urn, right? You shouldn't put directly, that's irei from a kli rishon. You shouldn't put the hot water into the cup, which already has the powder. You should put the hot water into that cup, and then you can put the powder into that.
Thank you.
Okay. See, so there are relevant things even if you don't drink coffee. Okay. Where it gets more interesting is like this. We know that there's something called kale habishul. Okay, let's start with that. Kale habishul means there are certain things which cook very, very easily, and therefore there are poskim, and therefore because they cook so easily, even when something is cooked in a kli sheni, even if something is cooked in a kli sheni, or even beyond that, people would say, certain things we cook so easily that we would say, even if it's in a kli shlishi, you would not be allowed to, even if it be beyond your even beyond, if you go take water from the urn and then you pour another cup, someone would say you still cannot cook it because it is kali abishal, it cooks too easily, okay? And there are certain things which are in this category, certain things which are questionably in this category. So for example, the classic example is tea. Can you make tea on Shabbos? So some of you make tea on Shabbos. When you make tea on Shabbos, what you're supposed to do is first pour the water into cup number 1, and then you pour cup number 1, which is your kli sheni, because it's the second utensil. The first utensil is the urn. You pour from the cup, that kli sheni, into another cup, and then you add the tea bag. That is permitted, according to many. There are those who say, no, still, tea cooks too easily, and therefore you shouldn't cook tea. Now, the same discussion would be true for coffee which was not freeze-dried, meaning if you have granules of coffee. Now, grinding coffee on Shabbos would certainly be asur, but if you have coffee that's already been ground, so you have the little kernels, the little granules, and you want to make coffee on Shabbos, so if you make tea on Shabbos, you would be able to make coffee in the same fashion, in terms of the same level of, after pouring it from a kli sheni into a third cup, then you'd be allowed to put your coffee into that. We'll talk about how in a second. But then there is, but according to those who do not make tea on Shabbos, that would not be allowed. Okay, sorry, yep.
Now you're talking about coffee that's not instant.
Correct. Coffee that's not instant coffee, but it's been ground. Obviously, again, you can't do the grinding, but coffee that's not instant coffee. Now, Starbucks Via. Okay.
My son, who's a coffee, whatever.
Maven is not freeze-dried. Okay, good. Good. Okay, but that's a coffee that you would just mix in regularly. Okay, great. So if it's coffee via, Starbucks via, which is coffee which wasn't freeze dried, okay, so for those of us, I do not make tea on Shabbos, it's my father's minhag, whatever, so we don't make tea, don't worry. What's it called? Then, so you would not, so for those of you who do make tea on Shabbos, you'd be allowed to use coffee via, but what you need to do is, again, hot water into cup number 1, kli sheni, take that water, pour it into another cup, okay, into a second cup, and then you can put the coffee granules into there. Another form of making coffee, which is, again, not freeze-dried coffee, is a pour-over. That's how I make my coffee, okay? So basically a pour-over means you have this little tiny contraption you put on top of a cup, okay? And it looks like this, and you put a filter, okay? And you put the grinds into that filter, okay? And then you pour hot water over it, okay? So what would be the possible issue over here? Separating. Borer. Is this the case of borer, right? Because I'm taking the coffee out of these grinds. I don't want the grinds in my drink. I want the coffee, right? And therefore, is this considered borer? So the answer is, it is not borer. It is not borer. And the reason for that is as follows. The Gemara actually a Mishnah. Mishnah in Shabbos says that a person is allowed to go ahead. If, let's say, there is a strainer with wine sediments, okay? So you have the grape sediments, okay? Grape sediments sitting on a strainer, and you pour water over those sediments, and what it does is the water pulls the whatever's left in the sediments out and brings it down into your cup. That is not called borer. The terminology of the Mishnah is that water goes in and water goes out. In other words, it's true that ultimately there is some borer taking place while it's hitting those sediments, but since product number 1 is just a liquid, product number 2 is a liquid, that's not called borer. Borer is when I have a mixture and I'm separating those two things together. It's a very novel idea, but it's a Mishnah. And the Mishnah says, since it's water when you start the process, and it's quote-unquote water when you end the process, that is okay. And therefore, similarly over here, there would be no borer issue. I'd be allowed to pour with my, I'd be allowed to pour from my kli sheni over here over the sediments, and over the coffee granules that have not been cooked before. They are just ground up coffee beans. I'm allowed to pour that hot water over it. There is no borer issue. On Shabbos.
But if you scientifically, and I know I'm interrupting, sorry, if you scientifically go and take that water that now has that liquid, it will separate either if you leave it long enough to now be.
What will separate? Sorry, if you take the coffee?
If you had the sediment from the, separated, and now you have this liquid that has some of the, essence of the separated granules in it, and you leave it sit, it will separate again. Or even if you go through the process of freeze drying it again, so it shouldn't.
Right. So and that's fine. Meaning, no. Feel free to ask questions. So, the idea is as follows. The idea is in halacha in general, we have this concept that what the eye sees is the way halacha deals with things. In other words, the fact that when you're dealing with, let's say, like I'll just use like a class example, an esrog, right? So you're looking at an esrog, does it have a spot? So you don't go like this. You'll see people going like this. And we could talk about why they do that later. But generally speaking, you're supposed to hold it like over here. If you don't see anything, if you have good eyesight and you don't see anything, that's not a spot. That's not a spot. Right?
Bugs.
Yes. Well, yes and no. If it's a bug that yes and no. Yes and no. If it's a bug that if you were to separate that bug, you were to see it, then that's a full-fledged bug. But you're right. Meaning, I think I've told you before. The microscope is only to help you see something that's seeable. If you were to use a microscope, the only way, meaning a bug in lettuce, I'll use lettuce as an example, right? The bug in lettuce, it's true I might need like a microscope to help me see it. But when I see that thing, I don't need a microscope. Those bugs are like real bugs. Those are bugs, right? I don't need a microscope to see those things. I can see them with my naked eye. I think I shared it with all of you before. Rav Heinemann, when the whole water controversy was breaking out in New York, Rav Heinemann came into a shir that he was giving us, a halacha shir. He brought in a cup of water. There's a cup of water. He said, well, people have asked me about the water in Baltimore. I don't see any bugs. He drinks it. Okay, so, but the point is that if it's something, again, in the lettuce, those are things, the microscope may help you see it, but you don't need a microscope to see the bug. I haven't cleaned lettuce in a long time, but when I have, I see bugs. Like, I see actual bugs. They're small, but you can see them. The only way you can see them is a microscope, they're organisms and whatever and all our stuff, like that is not relevant. If the only way I can see it is in that way. Okay, but we're not talking about bugs today. Okay, yes.
I just have this recollection of the movie Rishbizin. They take out the We have a loop,
A loop.
Okay, to look at the S-strokes, so like that's.
Yeah.
Total.
So it's not total. There's value. You know, I want to make it look nicer, and you want to inspect. You see a spot. You want to know if it's a black spot or a brown spot. In other words, the loop will play a role in trying to determine sometimes between you see something. I don't know what I see, so I could use my loop, and sometimes you want to go above and beyond. You could also use a loop to say there's nothing there. But halachically, you don't. You know, if you can't see again, if the spot itself cannot be seen without a loop, it's not there. Okay, fine. So that I don't know if that fully addressed your question, but the point is, it's water. The fact that I know scientifically, I don't even need science. Something happened. I know. Anyone knows that as the water went through this filter, it's literally a filter. That is the quintessential borer. Doesn't matter. Doesn't matter. Water when it goes in, water when it goes out. It's totally fine. Okay, so again, for those of you who make tea on Shabbos, you would be allowed to use a pour over. You'd want to use a kli shlishi when you're pouring the hot water, right? Because of the fact that it's something which was not cooked before. But the bottom line is, for those who make tea, you could use a pour over. Where it gets much more controversial is a French press. Okay, a French press basically works like this. You put the coffee beans and you put the hot water together in like some contraption like this, and then there is this thing on top of which you push down, and that thing which you push down is a strainer of sorts. Okay, so basically it's the holes are small enough. Sorry?
You're doing the borer.
You're doing right. So you are and you aren't. So basically, you put the thing down, and it holds back holds back the coffee. Okay, the coffee beans, but allows the water to go through. Okay, so certainly if I push it down all the way, and then I start. So here's the deal: as I'm pushing it, let's say I push it down partially. Let's say I push it down partially. Okay, and I'm holding it over here, and now here's a mix of water and coffee beans. Right? So what do we say the halacha is? If there's a mix, right? Meaning that if I go all the way to the bottom, even if I go all the way to the bottom, there's still going to be liquid there. Where it really gets separated is when I start pouring it out. In other words, the way these contraptions work is that you push down, you're not fully separating the water out, okay? What happens is that when I start pouring it out, either you drink, some people drink directly, depends on the size, some people drink directly from it, sometimes you pour it out into another cup. As I start pouring it, then it's separating the filter, the press itself is holding back the coffee beans, okay, the coffee, and it's letting me just get the liquid out. So we discussed this in the past for borer. If there's still a mixture of things, then technically it's still okay. It's only when I start pouring to the point where it's just coffee and no liquid. That's when it technically really only is an issue, okay? Now, poskim say it's a little dangerous. It's a little dangerous. Borer is a Isser D'Oraisa. For you to start going ahead and pouring it out, and you may come to a point where you're just going to have coffee beans and no water, you're going to be over an Isser D'Oraisa. And normally during the week, that's how you use this thing. You pour it out to the last drop, and it separates it completely. So for you to go ahead and use this on Shabbos, really bad idea. It's very dangerous. Therefore, don't do it. And therefore, most poskim say not to do it. That said, there is what to rely upon. Some make the following argument, 2 arguments. One is that coffee grinds, if you ever have a Turkish coffee, okay, if you go to Israel and you order the wrong coffee, what happens? What do you get in your coffee? Get coffee grinds itself. You're actually drinking the coffee grinds, okay, which you and I may find disgusting, but that is normal. And there are those who argue coffee grinds are actually edible. Coffee grinds are actually edible, and therefore, who says this is even borer? It's not like it's a bone and flesh. This is edible. Most of the time you won't want to eat it, but most people have
Chocolate covered coffee beans, espresso beans.
Yeah, but you're eating those typically like with the chocolate, not like in my again. If I would have coffee pieces in my coffee, I wouldn't be too happy. Like that's to me is.
No, I think the beans are disgusting.
Okay, so I wouldn't mind chocolate covered bean. I'm fine with, but this is like in my coffee. I just want it liquid, right? So there are some who argue that to begin with, coffee grinds may not even be borer because it's really something which is fully edible. And there are others who argue that since it's happening before immediate eating, if you recall when we discussed borer way back when, there was a discussion about when something is cut and and you're eating it right away, then there is what to rely upon to do some level of borer even in that moment. So there are those who are lenient. The bottom line is it's best not to use a French press. If you see someone using a French press, you don't have to give them skila. You don't have to yell at them. There is what to rely upon, even if they're pouring it to the last drop. But it's ideal not to use a French press. Okay, one more piece about cooking on Shabbos, and that is coffee at hotel on Shabbos. Okay, so Amir la'akum, telling non-Jews do something is probably, as we've spoken about so many times, the most abused halacha in halacha and Hilchah Shabbos, because people think I can ask a non-Jew to do anything at all. It's not true. However, if a non-Jew is doing something for themselves and are not doing it for you whatsoever, then you are allowed to benefit from it. So, for example, if Dennis our janitor or custodian wants to go into our dairy kitchen or which has no lights, and he wants to find something, and he opens the light for himself, and I walk in right after him, I could benefit from that light. Whereas if he would see me going in and say, "Oh, you need a light," and without even asking me to open the light, I'd have to leave the room. I can't benefit from that light, right? So as long as he's doing it for me, then I'm not allowed to benefit. But if he's doing it for himself, I am allowed to benefit. Okay, so with that in mind, one is allowed. So if you go to a hotel on Shabbos and they have, like, in their lobby, they brew coffee, right? They brew coffee, and you're allowed to get you could just pull coffee from there. You assume the vast majority of people in the hotel are not Jewish, we're going to assume, you could go ahead and pour yourself a cup of coffee from that urn. Okay, so for those if you ever spend a Shabbos in a hotel, then there's no problem whatsoever of having coffee that was made on Shabbos, since we could assume it was not made for you. Okay, so again, our different ways of making coffee. Let's just, sorry, go ahead.
What if you're at a Shabbos home and they know that the whole area is going to be full of Jews?
Yeah. That's for them to be brewing coffee on Shabbos. Again, if they don't know make sure you go to the place with good hashgacha, because there are places which drop the ball on this. Depends how they do it. Meaning, but if they are putting in an urn, if there's like an urn, again, depends on what they've done. But if it's like an urn with coffee in it, that seems highly questionable how they could have done that on Shabbos, because then they're literally doing it for Jews, and that's aser. Yeah. Now again, they could have cooked it before Shabbos. They could have kept it on before Shabbos. Sorry. Yeah, again, there are different ways, but yeah, there are different ways that it could do it. So again, bottom line is, instant coffee, ideal to do it in a kli sheni. Technically, a person does a kli rishon, it's really okay, but ideal to do it in kli sheni. When it comes to a pour over, there is no borer. A person is allowed to pour the water over, do it from a kli shlishi. Only for those who make tea on Shabbos, you are allowed to use pour over. French press, there is what to rely upon, better not to. Coffee at hotel on Shabbos, which is for, again, you're at a hotel which is not a Shabbaton, it's like a hotel for, that non-Jews are primarily there, you are allowed to get coffee from there on Shabbos. Okay, let's talk about kiddush. We spoke about this also in the past, and that is chamar. We have a halacha that when it comes to Friday night kiddush, you are supposed to make it on grape juice or wine. When it comes to Shabbos day kiddush, or havdalah, you are allowed to use something known as chamar medina, something which is seen as a drink which is seen as like a meaningful or a significant drink in that community or in that country. And therefore, the question is, does coffee qualify as such a drink? In other words, everyone would agree you cannot make kiddush Shabbos day on soda. That would not work, okay? Soda, according to the vast majority of poskim, would not qualify, because soda is something which is not seen as like a very special drink. It's not, again, people like soda, but it's not seen as like a meaningful drink. Coffee, most poskim say, is considered chamar medina, hence the fact that you spend like $15 on a drink. So even if, coffee in general is seen as chamar medina, therefore a person could make coffee, could make kiddush on coffee on Shabbos day, as well as for Havdalah. It's worth noting that ideally, the poskim do say you should really have something. You should ideally have grape juice or wine. If for whatever reason that's not practical, especially if, let's say, you are someone who, for women, this is more relevant. I'm making kiddush a little bit later in the day, typically. So if you're making kiddush like in the morning for breakfast, and it's not so comfortable. It doesn't have to be like this terrible situation. It's not so comfortable to have a cup of grape juice. Certainly not to have a cup of wine. Like, wake up and the first cup you have is a cup of wine. Like, we got to talk. So it's not like the most ideal situation. And so whatever, if it's uncomfortable to have your first drink as grape juice, you would be allowed to make your kiddush over your morning coffee or tea. Okay, that's the halacha of chamar medina. So again, for Shabbos day as well as Havdalah, ideally, if you're able to, if it's not too much of a stress, to do so on wine or grape juice would be the ideal. Okay, what about drinking coffee before davening? So there's a halacha that a person should not be eating food at all before they daven. Okay, so for men that means finishing shacharis, finishing Shemona Esrei. For women that means saying some form of davening, brachos or whatever it is, some form of davening. You're not allowed to eat before that point. So what is considered eating? Everyone agrees a cup of water is not considered eating. Okay, so the poskim talk about what about a coffee, right? So some of the poskim initially, again, this is one of those things where you see like this. It's all contextual. So early generations, you see them saying, no, water, not coffee. Okay, later generations say, black coffee is fine. You see the Mishnah Berurah says, black coffee is fine because that's just done to wake up. But he said, sugar and milk, no way. That's like considered like a luxury. That's considered something which is like, that's not just like the coffee. That's already like you're sitting back, you're kicking back. Not allowed. Ramosha Feinstein, decades later says, yeah, milk and sugar, because that's how people drink in the morning. That's what people have for their coffee. Where it gets more complicated now, if we want to fast forward a little bit, is what about your frappuccino with whipped cream and caramel, caramel macchiato? Okay, so I think, if you say this is my coffee, this is the only coffee I drink every day, this is the coffee I need to drink, okay, then it's not considered like a luxurious drink. I'm not so comfortable with that. In other words, so you'd say like a basic coffee is allowed. Okay, you have coffee, you can put milk in it, you can put sugar in it, but to go ahead and add anything that's seen as like, this is the thing I'm drinking to really kick back, and it's the flavors, and then this, it gets a little more complicated to say that that's allowed before Shacharis, and therefore I would try to avoid those. Milk and sugar, you have Ramosha to rely upon, but beyond that, I think it's a little tricky to do so. Yeah.
But if you're going to make kiddush on it, so say you say all of your brachos, and then you're going to make kiddush.
100%.
Then you need a mizonah.
Correct.
So that's still before Shacharis.
If for a woman, yeah. So that's fine, right? Yeah, which would be fine for a woman, right? You could go ahead and do that. Make kiddush.
Okay.
Have your mazonas before Shacharis. That's totally fine, right? I would just mention, just parenthetically, Baruch Hashem, it has not plagued our shul yet, but you'll walk into many shuls, and for reasons which are completely beyond me, people are drinking coffee like throughout the entire davening. I don't know where this came from. Sometime in the past, like couple of years, it became like a trend. I bother some of my colleagues who have nice coffee machines in their shul. I say, it's your fault. You shouldn't have had such nice. So we don't have any coffee machines in our shul. We have like this like old urn which you have to like make coffee. But you make coffee so exciting. I don't know. People are like in the middle of davening, just like sipping on coffee. It's like in the middle of like Sukkot Zimra, middle of Birkos Kriya Shema. It's bizarre. It's crazy. But it's so incredibly prevalent. And there halachically, it's not allowed. There's absolutely no allowance for such a thing. Yes.
My husband just started, like, he goes to Shomer, and so he's like, you want me to bring you a coffee? Because he does it when he's learning.
Right. Yeah. Learning is fine. Yes.
They're walking down the street with it on the way to shul.
Right. Okay, so listen, if you want to walk in the street, people have a water bottle, people have coffee. Okay, it's like, oh look, whatever. That I have no problem. Like, if you want to drink coffee, sipping, I don't know. Sometimes I'm running. I'm not like the leisure walker. It's on my DNA. But sometimes if I didn't have a chance to drink my coffee or whatever, I'll drink coffee while I'm driving, or I'll drink coffee while I'm walking. If I'm in a rush, yeah, typically not. But if a person's in a rush, okay, I have.
They're running to get to shul.
They're in such a rush to get to shul. That's what it is. So I don't know. Fine. If they're walking to shul with the coffee, okay. But during davening, like once you start Baruch Shamar, like you can't drink anything during that time. It's half six, certainly after Birkos Kriya Shema. Okay. That's just my I think everyone's pet peeve, but it's happening.
It's not about coffee, but there are people who bring water bottles into shul on Shabbos. So would that also be considered not?
Yeah, it should not be. So again, it can't. There are the times that you can. There's a couple of things. After Baruch Shamar, meaning before Baruch Shamar, you can drink. I don't know. You can drink water. I'll have water before Baruch Shamar. I'll finish a shiur and I'll drink. Before brachos begin, whatever it is. But whatever, that's fine. You can have a water bottle in shul. It's not going to make a mess. But once Baruch Shamar begins, you can't be mafsik. You can say Asher Yatzar. Okay, but you can't say a bracha of shahakol. Again, if a person, obviously there's scenarios where a person has a very parched mouth or whatever, they're going to be like extreme scenarios where a person has to drink water, they cannot daven. Okay, but in a normal scenario, you can't make a bracha on anything until after Shemona Esrei. After Shemona Esrei, you have to make kiddush. For the record, so I have a water bottle up with me when I'm speaking. I make kiddush outside, and then I'm having water because I already made kiddush. But it's time to be drinking water. It's a little bit hard to understand how, again, so drinking water between Baruch Sha'amar and Shemona Esrei would be aser for, and to be drinking water after, you would need to make kiddush before to be drinking water. Now again, there are scenarios, and I know some people, specifically in our shul, and I'm sure in every place, where they really have, like, medically, they cannot, their mouth is so dry. Again, this is like extreme circumstances. For them, they don't even have to, there's a question they have to even make a bracha on their water, because like for them, they can't function, like they can't fast, fasting's out of the question, like they just literally can't move their mouth. Okay. That's an exception. But stam to be drinking like water, it's become like so normal that people always have water bottles with them. So people, I don't know.
Right, and I see it in our shul. I never saw it anywhere else.
Okay. Go do a tour. Go to a tour.
Okay. In other words, I just think people don't know.
People don't. Could be. Yeah. Okay. It's a good thing we have a packed house. Everyone's learning all these laws now. Okay, we'll spread the word. Okay. So here's where it gets the most annoying to people because this clamps down on our way of life. And that is buying coffee at coffee houses, okay? So this is a question that goes back. It goes back to the 16th, actually, of Yaakov Emden, where this is discussed, is that he actually got in trouble. He was traveling and he was in England and he drank coffee at a coffee house and people were speaking negatively about him because of the fact that he did so. There are a number of questions that come up about drinking coffee in a coffee house. So whatever he had to defend it, it was a whole discussion. What are the questions that come up? A couple. Okay, one question that comes up is, well, first of all, there's a side point, which is not as relevant today. Back in the day, the whole notion of like a coffee house was like, it was a place where the intellectuals would hang out and they would share all these heretical ideas. We're not so worried about that. Right now, I'm more worried about the person putting their music down and like stop talking so loudly if I want to go to a coffee shop. But it's not that type of coffee house. That factor is not relevant. The two main factors. One is something called bishul akum. Bishul akum means something which is cooked by a non-Jew, I am not allowed to benefit from, okay, unless under very particular circumstances, right? But typically, if a non-Jew cooks something, I can't go ahead and benefit from their cooking. I can't enjoy that. The question is, what does that apply to? So there are, specific parameters, but typically one of the parameters is that if it's something which is seen as chashuv, as important, then it's included. Right? I think it was Circle this past week, Circle of kids magazines. I think, was it this past week or something? I don't know. I just noticed quickly. It said, does President Trump eat hamburgers and how does it affect halacha? Because what goes, meaning part of the criteria of what is considered like a special food is, would this be served at a king/president's table? So if you have a more casual president who likes casual food, does that impact things like potato chips, right? Potato chips. Your potato chips, if you eat potato, you shouldn't eat potato chips. They're very fattening. But if you eat potato chips, then they're cooked by non-Jews. Why are we allowed to eat potato chips? Okay, so one of the reasons is because we say potato chips are not considered a special food. What happens when a president is more casual, and now this is seen as like, oh, it's normal to have potato chips out of these meals? Discussion. Bottom line is, most people still eat potato chips, or some who don't eat potato chips. Okay, for this reason.
They don't have potato chips with a hechsher?
With a hechsher. Because it's bishul akum, because a non-Jew is cooking these chips.
Because it has, but it's only if it's a special.
If it's a special food. So most of us rely upon, even though I just told you not to, I have potato chips, we rely on the fact that, okay, we don't consider this a special food. But is that so? Again, that fluctuates a little bit in history. Coffee, as we just established before.
You're allowed to depend on
the hechsher.
Agency.
Correct. So correct. The Kosher Agency is saying that they rely on those who say it's not considered a special food. Correct. So bottom line is continue eating potato chips. Sorry, yes, but we understand there's a tension there because is this a special food? Now, coffee we just established when it comes to kiddush is by definition a special drink. It certainly is. So are you allowed to drink coffee that's brewed by your non-Jewish barista? The answer is, according to the Pri Chadash, and most rely on this halacha does not apply to things that are deemed water. What do you mean water? This is not water, it's coffee. But the post can basically say there is a point they make, like for example, when it comes to beer, what is beer made of? Beer is made of wheat. Why don't we make mizonos on it? Okay, so there are different reasons given. Some say it's a drink, but some say because at the end of the day, it's just a liquid. We treat it like water. Now, it's a much more expensive water, and whatever, it's not exactly like water, but we treat it anything which you're going to say, because it's a drink, it's not going to, a drink that you would say shahakol on, it does not fall under the category of bishul akum. Okay, so therefore, there's the most rely upon this, and say that bishul akum does not apply to such things. Okay, again, it's considered water, and therefore it's not going to be a problem of bishul akum. That only helps us with one issue. There's another issue, which is that many coffee shops sell things which are not kosher. Okay, they'll sell ham, they'll sell this, they'll sell that, and then at the end of the day, they throw everything into a sink or to a dishwasher, and there's boiling water going everywhere, and things are touching each other, and then you have a question. If you were to go ahead, if I were to tell you, if I'm going to come in, if someone tells you that, when you were out during the day, your cleaning help went ahead and washed your milchik dishes with some non-kosher dishes, what would you do? You'd freak out, right? Right? But when it comes to coffee shop, everyone's like, well, actually, somehow it's going to be okay. What's going on over here? Why are we, what's happening, right? So, a couple of principles, okay? A couple of principles. And that is, one principle is that when you are not sure if something is Eino Ben Yomo, okay, when you're not sure if something was, used within 24 hours, usually for something, not usually, almost always, for something to transfer flavor from one thing to another, a dish has to be Ben Yomo, has to be within 24 hours, okay? If it's earlier than 24 hours, it does not transfer its flavor to something else. Okay, so anytime you have a question, was this thing Ben Yomo? Unless you know definitively, there's a rule that we rely on and we assume it was not Ben Yomo. Okay, why are we allowed to make such an assumption? Discussion for another time, but the bottom line is, this has great relevance to many halachic questions. Person calls me, I had my spoon, my fleishik spoon, so was mixing my milchik dish Am I allowed to eat my milchig dish? The answer is, did you know your spoon was used in the past 24 hours? I'm not sure. Great. It's in a ben yomo, and therefore it doesn't cause any fleshig transfer into the dairy. You have to kasha the spoon, but we don't assume that the dish itself, the fleshig spoon, was full-fledged fleshig. It was in a ben yomo, therefore the flavor is mitigated, and it's not problematic. Still with me? Yeah? That's the concept of Eina Ben Yomo. We could assume things are Eina Ben Yomo. So if you're washing dishes in a coffee shop, even though they're washing dishes on a daily basis, etc., you're allowed, without knowing for sure, you're allowed to assume that it is Eina Ben Yomo, that is Eina Ben Yomo. And therefore, even though the dish, the cup that was used to make your coffee may have been washed in the same sink as, something which was used to touch bacon, okay? That's what we're talking about, by the way. Everyone's like, coffee. Like, just break it down for a second. You get a little more comfortable about going to a coffee shop when you start breaking this down, okay? So you have the fork that was used for bacon, which is going to be washed together with the cup that is making your coffee, okay? But you could assume it was Eino Ben Yomo. Now, here's the key thing. Eino Ben Yomo, this principle of Eino Ben Yomo that you're allowed to use as Eino Ben Yomo is only b'di'evet. B'di'evet normally means after the fact, meaning you call the rabbi or whatever, someone, again, mix the milchig with the fleshig spoon, whatever it is, after the fact you could say, oh, it was Eina Ben Yomo. I mean, I can't go ahead into my kitchen right now and say, oh, I don't have any, I want to mix my dairy product, and I have a fleshig spoon that wasn't used in 24 hours. Oh, don't worry, it's Eina Ben Yomo, I can start using my, right? Imagine someone goes in your kitchen now and starts using your Eina Ben Yomo fleshig spoons with milchig, and you say, what do you mean, it's Eina Ben Yomo, what's your problem? Because that's not b'di'evet. B'di'evet normally means after the fact. Okay. However, in Rav Yaakov Emden's tshuva about this discussion, he writes that this is only that he basically broadens the notion of b'di'evet as it relates to this notion of Eina Ben Yomo, and he says b'di'evet also could be understood to mean in a situation where you cannot find a regular alternative. Okay, huge leniency. He says when you cannot find a regular alternative, that is also b'di'evet. Okay, meaning that means when a person is traveling, that normally b'di'evet means after the fact. B'di'evet could also mean when you're kind of stuck. Okay, now as a person who drinks coffee, if I don't have my coffee and I forget traveling, I need my coffee. I really need coffee. It's sad, but I really need coffee. That is b'di'evet. You're traveling. I don't have another way to get a coffee, and the only place to get a coffee is McDonald's. Okay, McDonald's. That's where I'm getting my. But there's coffee over there. It's the only place I have coffee. I'm on the road. I'd be allowed to buy coffee there because that would be b'di'evet. It's, again, not after the fact, but it's a situation where I don't really have easy alternatives, and therefore I could rely on the after the factness, the b'di'evetness, and assume that the kalim, the utensils it was washed with, were not ben yomo, and therefore the utensils to make the coffee are going to be fine, and you would be allowed to buy a coffee in such a place when you're traveling. But if you're in Baltimore and you could buy a coffee, granted, it's not as good, not even close to as good, but at Dunkin' Donuts, or you can buy a coffee at Starbucks, or you can make a coffee in your own home because you have a home, 2 blocks away. You can't say, well, it's b'di'evet, I'm 2 minutes away from home, therefore I have to go ahead and make a coffee I can only get a coffee at Starbucks. If you know the Starbucks doesn't sell any tray food, then that's fine. But if you don't know for sure, then you have to be concerned that you might, again, just to spell it out, so recognize what we're dealing with. And people are like, oh, it's so machmir. No, it's the equivalent to someone going into your house and washing dishes with pork together with your dishes. You would lose your mind. That is literally what's happening when you're going to a coffee shop. They're washing the dishes together in the same sink. It's highly problematic. Now, the Store K, God bless them, went ahead and did something which was very nice, okay? People, and that is that they went ahead and they explored, and they went to Starbucks to see which dishes are actually cleaned in sinks, which things are not, and they have this beautiful list on the second side of your page over here, which tells you, they update it every year because things change. But basically what they tell you is which things, are acceptable at any Starbucks. So for example, a cafe Americano or an espresso, okay, as long as you avoid the shot glass, those are things which are made without any, they don't wash those dishes. I don't know all the details, but the point is that there are no concern of dishes being washed with other things, and therefore you go to any Starbucks. Even if you know it sells trafe, you could go to that Starbucks and buy those things. There are certain things, like for example, a cappuccino, where it's the dishes they use are washed with other things, and therefore if you're local, if you're here in Baltimore, you cannot use it. If you're traveling, it would be fine. Right? Same idea, right? So you have this beautiful list over here. Again, it gets updated every year, and these would be different things that you could or cannot buy in Starbucks. Of course, they point out in the middle. You want to make sure the whipped cream and the syrups, all that stuff are kosher. You could just ask them to look at it. They'll think you're crazy, but it's okay. They'll show it to you, and that's basically it. Okay, worth noting. Fine. That's the bottom. That's the basic idea of shopping.
You can also get an espresso and then have them pour in cold milk. because espresso's okay, it's the milk, it's the
It's the
pitcher with the
frosting.
milk, that's
Yeah.
the problem.
It says espresso's okay in general.
Right, but, and you can have them add cold milk instead of a hot froth milk. Cause they make the milk is made in a little.
Frother. Got it. That goes into the dishwasher. Got it. If you need a good espresso, have the milk, add the milk later. Good to know. Yes.
Can you apply these guidelines if you're in another country?
For sure.
Okay.
Meaning, you're like stuck, whatever, you're out.
Not stuck, but let's say when I'm
Traveling on vacation. Yeah, 100%. That would be meaning you don't have a house, you could just like pop into and make a coffee. There's no other places over here. There's the coffee shops. Yeah, when I'm on the road, when I'm traveling to like whatever it is, and like it's not a normal, it's not my home. Anyway, any place is not, again, if I'm not in like Queens.
You need to worry about the milk.
What?
In Europe.
Okay,
the milk is separate question.
A milk's separate question, but let's assume the milk's. Let's get around the milk question for a second. In terms of the coffee itself, right? Assuming you know which milk is kosher, which milk is not kosher in those places. But yeah, 100%. If you're traveling somewhere, you could go ahead and buy coffee anywhere. You could buy coffee anywhere and just okay, and you rely on this again. It's a little, when you start thinking about what you're relying upon, it's a little uncomfortable, frankly. But this is the halachic system that you can rely. That you can rely on this again. Keep in mind, they're making bacon in the same place. They're likely washing together, but this is the halachic system, and you curl up. But yes, 100%. If you're traveling anywhere, I could be traveling on the turnpike, it's the same thing. If I'm on the turnpike and I need a coffee right now, and the only place that's selling coffee is a Starbucks that also sells bacon,
Right.
I go buy coffee there. McDonald's.
So just to like confirm, because let's say when I'm here in town, I just get, if I want, like an iced latte, because that's fine. But if I'm traveling, even on the turnpike, I could get a hot latte?
Yes.
God,
Yes.
we should hang out more on the turnpike.
There you go. Yes.
I apologize, just a little bit off the coffee subject, but you brought up the bishul akum and potato chips. So what about packaged bread that has a hechsher, like Pepperidge Farm
Yeah.
dry bread or something, as an OU?
Right. So it's a little.
Bishul akum.
So there is a difference made by bread, which is made like mass produced, which is not relevant to chips, and I'm trying to remember why, and I don't remember why. There is a difference when something is being made as meaning a coffee in the store is the most problematic because they're making it for you. Bread in a baker like being mass produced is less problematic. I don't remember why that's not the same leniency when it comes to chips. I just don't remember offhand. But it's the difference between the bread being made by like your neighbor in a kosher, like your neighbor making in your house, as opposed to being made by like a mass produced. That is the leniency. I just don't remember why that same leniency does not apply by chips. I don't remember.
Also, is pasta akum the same as bishul akum?
That's a good point as well. There might be different leniencies there. I don't remember offhand. Yeah.
Okay.
I don't know. That could be the difference. Yeah.
Cookies and-
So that falls into the past. Yeah. It's going to fall in the past category. But yeah, that could be the difference. I don't remember offhand. Yeah. Okay. One more very relevant set of halachos, and that is brachos they make on coffee. Okay. So coffee, even though it's a bean, it's a drink, so we make shahakol on it. Some discussion about what to make on if you have coffee beans on their own. We're not going to talk about that. Most people don't have coffee beans on their own, unless they're covered in chocolate. Different story. But here's the question. Let's say, as many people do. Okay. We'll talk about the people that you notice walking from home to shul drinking the coffee. So there's a notion halacha called shinoi makom. When I change place, if I'm drinking something here, and then I go home and I'm drinking the same water bottle, I have to make a new bracha. No question about it, right? But let's say I started drinking coffee over here, and then like I have a coffee during my breakfast, and then I go ahead and I start walking outside. Even though I know I'm going to go outside, the post can say I need to make a separate bracha when I go outside. Okay? Because at the end of the day, it's a separate place, and there's nothing, the bottom line is a separate place, and therefore I have to make a separate bracha as I go outside. Rav Moshe has an interesting tshuva. He says that if when I started drinking, I'm already on my way out. You know what I mean? In other words, as opposed to I'm eating breakfast over here and I'm drinking, and this is going to be true for other drinks as well. So even if you're not a coffee drinker, this should be relevant. You have a bottle of water. People have, everyone walks around with 14 gallons of water, which is great. It's fantastic. Okay. So you start your water bottle during breakfast and then you continue your water bottle as you walk outside. You'd have to make a new bracha. But if I pick up my water bottle because I'm picking up my keys and I'm picking up my purse and I'm picking up all these things, I go outside and I want to start sipping it, I'm on my way out. Rav Moshe says that's like I'm outside already. And therefore I'd only need one bracha. Okay, so keep that in mind in terms of, again, people oftentimes will walk around the coffee. I don't know where you started the coffee. Don't tell me. It doesn't matter. But the point is that, so if you started it in the car, right? So then
I started it in the car.
Okay, so you're traveling, and then when you come here, you should probably say a new bracha, because this is now a new location. As long as you're traveling and walking around, don't drink it. Yeah. Okay, but we'll all say amen to you. No, don't worry. But yes, go ahead.
Say a bracha achronim between?
So bracha achrona. That is a good question. So it gets a little tricky, the bracha achrona. In order to qualify for bracha achrona, okay, you need to have 3 ounces in 4 minutes. Now, if you're drinking a cold drink, then that oftentimes is the case. And yes, if you're going to a separate place, you should try to make a bracha achrona before you go to the new place, right? So if I know I'm drinking a little bit during my meal, and then I'm going to go ahead and have some more somewhere else, make a bracha achrona, and then you make a new bracha afterwards. With a hot coffee, it's pretty hard to do that. It's really hard to do. Some people say you should leave let it cool off at the bottom, and some later poskim say that, with a hot coffee, what you should do is you sip the coffee, and then make sure to leave like 3 ounces at the end, and then drink it down. Other poskim say there's no chiyuv, there's no obligation to do things which are nasty. Like if you like a hot coffee, not even nasty. That's too strong of a word. But the point is if you want a hot coffee, like it's a tea. Imagine, for those of you tea drinkers, imagine tea. So the halacha would be that at the end of your tea, leave some cold tea. I don't want cold tea. I want a hot tea, right? Halacha doesn't demand of you to go ahead and do bizarre things. Well, okay, but to do other things so that you're going to make the right bracha. No, the bottom line is drink the coffee as you drink the coffee. So most times when you drink hot drinks, you will not say a bracha achrona, and that's okay. There's no bracha achrona because you're not drinking 3 ounces of hot liquid within the span of 4 minutes. You're sipping. It's going to take longer than that, presumably. If you know you had it, you'll say a bracha achrona. It really depends on how hot, what your tongue tolerance is and all that. Yes?
So if you're sitting at your computer and you're drinking a bottle of water,
Yeah.
you're just sipping and you don't finish it in 4 minutes, you don't say a bracha achrona?
Absolutely.
Oh my gosh.
So some would say with water it's going to be a little easier, right? In other words, water will be because it's cold. And so I'll say drink 3 ounces right away and then you start, and then keep on sipping. But if you didn't, that's fine.
And then when you finish, you say.
And then when you finish, because you already had, meaning it's like hamotzi, right? You have like the first, in the beginning, have your bigger piece of bread, and then you don't have to worry about it. I mean, you can't be thinking, right? So in the beginning, make sure you drink, it's like a few chugs, to have your 3 ounces. It's not so much, right? 3 ounces is not a huge amount. Have that in the beginning, and then just sip, and then when you're done, you just say b'nefashos.
So you're saying, I'm sorry.
Go ahead, Lisa.
So,
Yeah.
so anytime you eat, you really need to, like if you wash, like you said, mostly, then you should.
Well, then it's an ounce. For solid, it's going to be an ounce, a lot less. For
Well,
solid
yeah, right, but whatever it is, you should have that.
measurement, yeah.
Because I sort of, at the beginning of so if you're eating a sandwich, you should take a good bite at the beginning.
Yeah, most of the time, I think most of the time you do that. Meaning an ounce is really not that big, right? Yeah, an ounce is it's like a golf ball, right? Meaning think about it's nothing. It's like if you're eating a sandwich or food, you're gonna have that within the first 4 minutes. I don't think you have to worry. Meaning I don't think most of the time when you're sipping is the time you want to be cognizant of this because for those some of us like to nosh while we're working or whatever it is. You want to think I want to make sure I have the right measurements and just do it in the beginning so you don't have to worry about it the whole. You don't drive yourself crazy. Yeah.
To what degree, versus I start off in my office, I start off in the dining room and then I go to the living room.
Good. So most folks can say in one house it's all considered one place. There's some discussion, but certainly if that's the norm, that's what you do, you walk around or whatever it is when you work at home or whatever, then that's considered one place. Outside of your house, going, even a porch is some discussion. We'll leave the porch aside, but certainly leaving your house, that's a shinui makom. But in your same house, if that's the norm that you're eating, walking around, there's no shinui makom there. Yeah.
Okay, so I can break this down. Getting back in the car, it's a different trip.
Yeah, we also had a significant amount of time in between it.
So,
yeah,
you would say. Finish this. Where am I going to finish it and with or without a bracha?
Okay, so right now, anywhere you go, you're going to want to make a new bracha because you're going to go back to the car. Meaning, if you're in a place, there's discussion let's say I'm eating in my house. Okay, again, there's a whole. Keep in mind, this discussion is about drinks, which are less place oriented. If I'm middle of a suda with bread or even mazonos, the laws are more lenient because there's something which is kind of binding me to the place halachically. Okay, when it comes to drink, there's nothing really binding you to the place. That's the basic principle. So if you're in your house, if you're drinking a coffee and you go outside for a second, get something from your car, go back. Many poskim will say don't make a new bracha. You don't really, but over here you start in the car. You took a big break. There's isn't a break. You came to learn, right? You're gonna go back and you want to drink more in your car. Make a bracha in the car. If you go back into the house and you're gonna be eating, drinking again in the house, you make a new bracha in the house again. Okay. A lot of brachas, okay? Or drink quickly. Okay, that is our discussion of coffee. So we're trying something new for the summer. If there are different topics that might be interesting, again, not just pertains to Shabbos or Kashrus, but something which could be, is a broad topic. Happy to jump into it. So I'm open to ideas, suggestions, and we'll pick up next week.